The morning my father-in-law handed me an envelope across my own kitchen table, 3 days after I buried my mother, I actually thought it was a sympathy card. It wasn't. Inside was a cashier's check for $8 million and a single typed page that said, in plain legal language, that I was to vacate the family home, surrender my interest in Whitmore Construction, and have no further contact with my husband's family. There was a line at the bottom for my signature. My father-in-law, Gerald, sat across from me with his hands folded and waited, the way you wait for a vending machine to drop your selection. I remember the coffee going cold in my mug. I remember the sound of the refrigerator humming. I remember thinking that I had just spent 4 days making funeral arrangements, accepting casseroles from neighbors, and holding myself together with nothing but routine and stubbornness. And this man had chosen the 5th day to come into my home and try to buy me out of my own life. I put the envelope back on the table and said, "I'll need some time to think about this." He nodded like that was the expected answer and let himself out. What Gerald didn't know, what almost nobody knew at that point, was that I had been a forensic accountant for 11 years. Not the kind who sits in an office and reconciles quarterly reports, the kind companies hire when they think someone on the inside has been stealing from them, the kind who finds money that other people have tried very hard to make disappear. And 3 weeks earlier, before my mother got sick, before everything fell apart, I had started finding some very interesting things inside the books of Whitmore Construction. My name is Audrey, and I want to be clear about something before I go any further. I did not marry into this family looking for problems. I married Nathan Whitmore 9 years ago because I loved him. He was funny and steady, and he made me feel like the most grounded version of myself. His family was complicated. Gerald was controlling. Nathan's older brother Cole was a bully in the way that certain men never grow out of. And their mother Judith had long ago chosen peace over honesty. But I thought that was just family. Everybody's family is something. Nathan ran operations for Whitmore Construction, the company his grandfather had started in Raleigh. It wasn't glamorous, but it was solid. Mid-sized commercial contractor, mostly school buildings and municipal projects across North Carolina. Real work. Nathan was proud of it in a quiet way that I respected. We bought a house in Cary, 20 minutes from the company's main office. We talked about children in a loose, someday maybe way. Life was ordinary and good. Then his grandfather passed 2 years ago and left the company's ownership structure in a way that nobody had anticipated. Nathan got 30%. Cole got 30%. Gerald got 20%. And the remaining 20%, this was the part that caused problems, was left in a trust to be managed by an independent executor and distributed based on company performance over the following 3 years. Cole did not take this well. Cole had always assumed he would inherit the whole thing. He was the oldest son, he'd worked there longer, and he had the particular kind of confidence that comes from being told your whole life that you are special. The trust structure felt like a judgment to him. He started pushing Gerald to find a way to consolidate ownership, which really meant find a way to push Nathan out. I stayed out of it. It wasn't my company. Nathan handled his own family. But then Nathan started coming home later. Quieter. There were calls he stepped outside to take. Not every night, but enough that I noticed the pattern before I let myself notice the pattern, if you know what I mean. I kept filing it under stress, work stress, family stress, the grief that men sometimes carry sideways about things that aren't really about work at all. It was Judith who finally told me, which I did not expect. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon and asked if she could come by. She sat on my couch with her purse in her lap and looked at the floor and said, "There's someone. I don't know how serious it is. I thought you should hear it from me and not from Cole, because Cole will use it as a weapon." Her name was Farah. She worked in the permits office at the county building. Nathan had apparently known her for about 8 months. I thanked Judith. I waited until she left, and then I sat in my kitchen for a long time. Then I called my mother. My mother was a practical woman who grew up in a small town outside Asheville and never once in her life confused feelings with strategy. She said, "Don't do anything for 30 days, just watch." So I watched, and what I saw was not just a husband who was distant. It was a husband who was also, very quietly, starting to remove himself from our life. Small things. He moved his laptop. He opened a separate checking account, which I only noticed because I'm a forensic accountant, and I noticed checking accounts the way other people notice haircuts. He started being very careful about his phone. I did not confront him. I watched. Then, 6 weeks after Judith came to my house, my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and everything else became secondary. I spent the next 2 months driving to Asheville on weekends, sitting with her in the chemo suite, eating terrible vending machine sandwiches with her, watching her get smaller. Nathan came twice. He was polite and sad-looking, and I could feel the distance between us like weather. He did not offer to come more often, and I did not ask him to. She died on a Sunday in October, peaceful at home with me holding her hand. I drove back to Cary the next morning and told Nathan, and he held me while I cried, and I let him, because grief makes you accept comfort from wherever it's available and you sort out what it means later. 3 days after the funeral, Gerald sat at my kitchen table with that envelope. I didn't tell Nathan about the visit right away. I needed to understand what I was dealing with first. I went back to the work I had started before my mother got sick. What had caught my attention originally was a pattern in the company's subcontractor payments. Specifically, a handful of vendors who appeared in the system going back about 18 months, but whose addresses, when I looked them up, resolved to vacant lots or mail forwarding services. The amounts were enormous, individually, between $40,000 and $90,000 per invoice, which in commercial construction is the kind of number that doesn't automatically raise flags. But there were a lot of them, and they all traced back to projects that Cole had direct oversight of. I had about 60% of what I needed when my mother got sick. Now I came back and finished the job. By the time I was done, I had documented just over $2.3 million in fraudulent payments over 22 months. Shell companies, all of them. The money went in circles through a series of LLCs before landing in an account that I traced, through some very patient work, to a name I recognized. Cole's college roommate, who now apparently managed investments for Cole personally. I made copies of everything, 3 sets, on 3 separate drives, stored in 3 separate locations. One with my friend Pam in Durham, who I trusted completely, and who knew nothing about finance and therefore would never accidentally look at what she was holding. One in a safety deposit box at a bank I did not normally use, one that I kept. Then I called a lawyer. Not the family lawyer. My own lawyer. A woman named Tina who specialized in business litigation and who had been recommended to me by a colleague 3 years ago, and whose card I had kept for no particular reason. Sometimes you keep a card. I explained a situation. She asked very precise questions. Then she said, "Before we talk about next steps, you need to understand what you have. You have a fraud case. You also potentially have a divorce case. Those are not the same case, and they need different strategies. Are you prepared for this to go in both directions?" I told her I was. Then I went home and asked Nathan to sit down. I want to be honest about what that conversation was like, because I think people sometimes imagine these moments as dramatic, raised voices, broken things, someone saying something they can never take back. Ours wasn't like that. We sat at the same kitchen table where his father had handed me that envelope, and Nathan looked at his hands and told me the truth. Yes, it was Farah. No, he didn't know what he wanted. Yes, he had been thinking about leaving. No, he didn't know how to say it. I listened to all of it. Then I told him what I'd found in the company's books. The color left his face. He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Nathan. You know what I do for a living." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Does my father know you have this?" "Your father," I said, "came to this house 3 days ago and offered me $8 million to walk away. So I'd guess he at least suspects I know something." Nathan put his face in his hands. Not out of guilt, I think. Or not only. Out of the specific exhaustion of a person who has been watching something bad happen for a long time without knowing how to stop it and has just been informed that it's over. "Cole's been doing this for almost 2 years, I said. "Your father knows. The offer wasn't just about you and Farah, Nathan. It was about making sure I left before I could do anything with what I found. What Gerald had miscalculated, what both of them had miscalculated, was that offering me money to go away is only effective if the person you're offering it to needs the money, or is afraid of you, or has more to lose by staying than by leaving. I was not broke. I was not afraid. And at that point, I had considerably more to gain by staying. I told Nathan I wanted a divorce. I told him I was going to report the fraud to the company's board, because that was my legal and professional obligation, and also because $2.3 million had been stolen from a company that was partly his and he deserved to get it back. I told him I was not going to do anything vindictive, but I was also not going to disappear quietly with a cashier's check and pretend I hadn't found what I found. He nodded. He looked relieved, actually, in the way that people sometimes look relieved when someone else makes a decision they've been too afraid to make themselves. We agreed to tell no one until I had spoken to my lawyer again. I called Tina that night. What happened over the next 6 weeks moved faster than I expected, which is what happens when you have documentation. Tina sent a formal letter to Gerald and to the company's board of directors. The letter laid out, in plain language, what I had found, what I could prove, and what I intended to do with it. It also noted, very calmly, that any attempt to pressure me to sign away my interests, including but not limited to the delivery of cashier's checks to my home, could constitute witness tampering, and that any such attempts should cease immediately. Gerald called Nathan. Nathan, to his credit, told him to call Tina. Gerald called Tina. That call lasted 4 minutes. The board called an emergency meeting. Cole was placed on administrative leave. An outside forensic audit was commissioned, which was almost funny to me, since I had already done the work, but I understood the optics. You can't just take the soon-to-be ex-wife's word for it, even if her word is correct and documented and cross-referenced 3 different ways. The outside audit confirmed everything I had found, then found an additional $400,000 I had missed, which I'll admit stung a little professionally, but I got over it. Cole resigned before they could fire him. He and his lawyer spent the next 3 months negotiating a repayment agreement that, I was told, required him to liquidate 2 properties in his investment portfolio. I was not privy to the terms. I didn't need to be. Gerald tried, twice more, to reach me directly. Once through Judith, who called me and said in her careful way that she was just passing on a message and that she personally thought I was handling everything with a great deal of grace. I told her I appreciated that. The second time was through a mutual friend, which was a choice that ended that friendship, because I don't respond well to being managed. He stopped after that. The divorce was quieter than the fraud case, which is not how people expect these things to go. Nathan and I had a mediator, not a courtroom. We sat across a table from each other with our respective lawyers and divided 9 years of shared life into columns. He kept the house. I took my retirement accounts, my share of 2 investment properties we had bought together, and the settlement that accounted for the years I had spent supporting his income while building mine. Tina was very good at making sure that the pending fraud investigation didn't reduce what I was owed. Your contributions to this marriage and to your career, she said once, are not contingent on what your in-laws did. We are not going to let one conversation contaminate the other. She was right, and I was grateful for her. Nathan and I shook hands in the parking lot of the mediator's office. He looked thin and tired. He asked how I was doing, and I said honestly that I was okay. He said he was sorry, not just for Farah, I think, but for all of it. For the way he had handled things, for letting his family's problems become my problems without ever properly warning me what I was walking into. I told him I believed him. I don't know what happened with him and Farah. That part of the story belongs to him, not to me. I want to talk about the day I went back to my mother's house. After the mediation was settled, after the lawyers had filed what needed to be filed, I drove out to Asheville by myself on a Friday and let myself into the house with the key I still had. My aunt had been checking on it, keeping the heat running, making sure nothing froze or flooded. Everything was just as my mother had left it. The reading chair by the window, the shelf of paperback mysteries she'd been working through alphabetically by author, the coffee maker that she bought in 2003 and refused to replace because it still worked fine. I sat in her chair for a long time. I thought about what she had said to me when I first told her about Nathan. Don't do anything for 30 days, just watch. I thought about how that advice, sit still, gather information, don't act before you see clearly, had served me better in the worst year of my life than anything else I could have done. My mother never met Tina. She never knew about the fraud case, or the board meeting, or what happened to Cole. She died thinking I was in the middle of a hard marriage and would figure out what to do. She trusted me to figure out what to do. I hope I did. I kept the coffee maker. It still works fine. The thing about being offered money to leave is that it tells you very clearly what the person offering it thinks of you. They think you have a price. They think what you know, what you've built, what you're owed, all of it can be converted to a number that will make you stop mattering. Gerald looked at me across my kitchen table the week after I buried my mother and decided that $8 million was what I was worth. That was the number he landed on. 8 million, and then I would become a person who used to be in the family, a loose end, a closed chapter. What he didn't understand, what neither of them understood, was that I wasn't fighting for money. I wasn't even fighting for the marriage which had ended long before anyone admitted it. I was fighting for the version of myself that walks out of a situation with her integrity intact. That version doesn't sign papers when she's grieving. That version doesn't let herself be managed. That version shows her work. I have an apartment now in Durham on the 3rd floor of a building with a lot of light. I can see the tree line from my desk in the morning. I have a job I'm good at, work that matters, and a friend named Pam who once held a flash drive for me without asking any questions and still teases me about it when we get dinner. I'm 34 years old and I'm starting over, which sounds like a sad thing to say until you realize that starting over, when you do it on your own terms with your eyes open, is actually the least sad thing in the world. Gerald's offer is still sitting in my file in a folder labeled simply 2023. I kept it, not as a reminder of how bad things got, as a reminder of how bad things got, as a reminder of the moment I realized how clearly I could see. I keep thinking about the coffee that went cold while Gerald sat across from me, such a small detail. But that's the thing about moments that change your life. They don't announce themselves. There's no music. There's just a mug going cold and a man waiting and you sitting there deciding, very quietly, who you are. Gerald believed I had a price, and I understand why he believed that, because most pressure works. Most people, when they're grieving and blindsided and alone, will take the path that ends the pain fastest. That's not weakness. That's human. What Gerald didn't account for was that I had spent 11 years training myself to do the opposite of that. To sit with discomfort, to look at the numbers, not the noise, to wait until I could see clearly before I moved. That's the thing nobody tells you about building real competence in something. It doesn't just help you at work, it becomes the way you move through the world. The same discipline that made me good at tracing fraudulent payments, the patience, the refusal to guess when I could verify, the insistence on following every thread to its source, that discipline is what kept me from signing that paper. It's what kept me from doing anything out of panic or hurt or the desperate need to just make it stop. Cole stole from his own family's company for nearly 2 years. Not because he was clever, because he assumed no one was paying close enough attention, because he had always moved through rooms where people looked away from him out of habit or fear. What he ran into, eventually, was someone who looked directly. I don't think of what happened as revenge. Revenge implies I was trying to hurt someone. I was trying to document the truth. The consequences that followed. Cole's resignation, the repayment agreement, the audit, those weren't things I engineer for satisfaction. They were what happens when accurate information reaches people who are obligated to act on it. Cause and effect, plain and simple. Gerald set the terms when he walked into my house. I just declined to pretend those terms were acceptable. There's something I've been trying to find the right words for, and I think it comes down to this. The hardest part of that year wasn't any single thing that happened. It was staying honest with myself while everything was falling apart. Honest about the marriage. Honest about what I was seeing in those financial records. Honest about what I could and couldn't fix. It would have been so easy, so understandable to look away from any of it. To decide it was too much. Too complicated, too costly to face. My mother used to say that the people who come out the other side of hard things aren't the ones who never got knocked down. They're the ones who stayed curious instead of just scared, who kept asking what's actually true here, even when the answer is inconvenient. That's the only inheritance she left me that I'm certain I'll never spend. I'm starting over at 34. I have good work, A good lawyer, I'll probably send a nice bottle of wine every December for the rest of my life, and a friend who held a flash drive without asking questions and still brings it up at dinner. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything.